That's interesting. Yeah,
Is it the same 5 nights every year?
good question. That's a good question. I need my Library of Congress, also known as my iPhone.
Hello.
This chapter 3 was a doozy.
Yes, it was.
Well, we have been so crazy here moving into our place, and we're having hardwood floors sanded and redone and new windows and all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's in such disarray that I will just say that I'm behind on the reading. So I'm just going to sit back and listen to everyone else's confusion.
We're just going to call it, Michael, a Hanukkah miracle. You're here. You're here.
I am. And I will be at the big event on Saturday.
Oh, swell.
We're so excited for that.
And Prawl,
I'm here.
lunar calendar.
Ah, so that's another thing they have in common.
You bet. We're going to go back and correct that. Rabbi, we're comparing Diwali with Hanukkah.
Oh, okay. You found some parallels?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Because I have trouble with my mic sometimes.
Yes, Lenny, I can hear you.
Thank you.
Do Diwali and Hanukkah always turn up around the same time?
Well, they're on a lunar calendar. So it's a good question. I didn't get that far. But definitely.
Okay. So, we turned the corner a little bit in this book by the Besht, Baal Shem Tov. The first 2 chapters of this book are really a little more philosophical. This one is still philosophical, but it's also clearly geared towards more practice, which is not to say that it's, like easy to understand handy tips, but the point is that the focus of the Baal Shem Tov is on our experience of tefillah, more so here. Is that the Alice Gansfield? Hey, how nice.
Hi, nice to see you.
It's so good to see you. It's a friend from my days in Boulder. How wonderful to have you here. I'm delighted that you're here.
Welcome.
Alice, sorry, at the risk of embarrassing you here. So Alice was great and gracious in many ways and so involved in the shul and just a big helper. But also she came into me one year after Yom Kippur, or maybe it was just before, and said, this Unatana Tokef, I just ain't buying it. I don't get it. I don't like the theology of it. And I challenged her to explore it and open her heart to it and to come up with alternative ways of thinking about it. And she really embraced that challenge. And she also made beautiful little micro talitot for my boys. These adorable, hilarious little talisim. Anyway, it's good to see you, Alice.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me sit in on this.
Oh, yeah, of course. So we're going to look at chapter 3 now. And one thing I want to say, I put this in the Facebook group, and but I'll just share it with you. I figured out, it's not like it was hard to figure out. I just hadn't read carefully. So the reason that, so when you see a teaching with a decimal point, so for example, what's the first one in chapter 3? Like 37. So there's teaching 37, and then there's 37.1. So just for your information, whenever there's a decimal point teaching, it means that is not included in the original Amud HaTefillah. It's not included in the original book. So, for example, on page 30 of our book, where you see 37.1, 37.2, those are added by the current editor to help flesh out and explain the integer that precedes them. So 37.1 and 37.2 are meant to help explain or to fill in 37, so to add to it. So anyway, if you remember way back in the first class, I was sort of surprised that my Hebrew version of the original of Amud HaTefillah didn't correspond exactly because this version had these extra numbers. Anyway, so that's the reason for the extra numbers.
When there's an extra number with the decimal points, what what's put in is not the editor's comments. It's something he got from some other Hasidic commentary. On
Yeah. It's from many of the. So if you remember, so the Baal Shem Tov, the Amud HaTefillah is comprised of the teachings of the students of the Baal Shem Tov, because the Baal Shem Tov didn't actually put anything into writing. And so you get the teachings for the Magid of Mezerich and the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov and Yaakov Yosef of Polon and all these other guys. And the additional teachings tend to also be from those same sources. They're just added to it. So anyway, that's just for your information. Okay. So for those who don't know, we're using this translation of Amud HaTefillah, translated as Pillar of Prayer, translation by Menachem Kalas, and I will put up on my my own translation when we look at it for those who don't have the book in front of them. My translation is not identical to Kalas's by any means, but you know, it's better than not having anything in front of you. So I'll open that up, and as soon as it loads, I will share it when we get to number 37. So the first thing I wanted to say is maybe the most obvious, which is that, and I've said it before, but we can really see it in this chapter. The revolution of the Besht, of the Baal Shem Tov, and therefore the whole Hasidic, the growth of the tree of Hasidism that followed the Baal Shem Tov, was the centrality of human experience, or changing the focus to human experience in avoda, in service of God. So whereas when you look at for example, Share Ora, right, the book from whose title this class takes its name, Gates of Light, or at the Zohar, or at the works of the Ari, who we have not studied together, Itzhak Luria, or any of the Kabbalistic masters, or the primary sources of the Kabbalah, the Ramchal. I mean, we could go on. For the focus of those is on the cosmos, and their focus is on trying to decode the realm of the divine. And the human experience is an afterthought in those works, not because any of them would have said human experience is not important, but because it just wasn't the focus. The focus was trying to understand the layers of obfuscation and revelation that are involved in God's operation of the world. And so there was a very minimal aspect of focus, if you think back to Shari Ora, on saying, a person should do this, or a person should try to have the kavanah of this and be aware of Malchut or of Tiferet and try to elevate. But beyond that, sort of saying like the realm of the divine is here and you should try to get there. Beyond that, there wasn't a focus on the human experience. And now, we take it for granted, when we say things like my prayer experience wasn't meaningful, or I'm searching for meaningful prayer experience, or whatever it might be. You know, I want the prayers to move me. We take it for granted that that the human is at the center. Um, Part of this is, and I don't want to talk too much about this, but just to mention it, the Baal Shem Tov does not come out of nowhere, and it's across in a couple of hundred years before him, within the entire Western world, we, as many historians have pointed out, you begin to see the individual emerge as a focus of art and of literature and theology. So we have to see him historically within this context. But Jewishly speaking, it really is a revelation, and I mean that in both senses of the term. It's really a revelation to place the individual at the center, and that becomes the focus of his concern. And while he has good theological reasons for doing that, which we'll talk about, or I should say rather that there's a deep theology underlying his emphasis on individual experience, um, that's also one of the reasons, or if not the central reason, that Hasidism kind of catches fire and takes the world by storm and completely transforms the world, because the Jewish world at least, because there are individuals who are seeking, of course, every individual is seeking some connection to the transcendent, I think, whether they recognize it or not. And the Baal Shem Tov is addressing them individually, addressing us individually in the messy, messed up, meshugana, twisted, confusing world of experience that we all live in. That's where the Baal Shem Tov is really putting his focus. Anne, Prahl?
I get what you're saying, and I can see that as a big change. I guess we can't really know, but can you imagine what the people who were praying before that were taking away from, or were bringing to? What was their goal in praying if it wasn't to have divine revelation or to become closer to God?
That's such a great question. That's a really, really good question. I don't think I'm qualified to answer that, and I also think there's a limit to what we can know. But you know, the Zohar, for example, assumes that we have an obligation to do tikkun ha'olam, to try to rectify the world, in the sense of like everything we do down here affects the cosmos to an infinite degree, and it's our task as human beings, like God needs us, God is waiting for us, so to speak, to set the world aright. And so one could imagine from there that the Zohar gave people a sense of responsibility, and an obligation that they had to take part in this. Now, I'm speaking a little bit. Well, not a little bit. I'm speaking very much too broadly here. So there's an amazing book called I think it's called A River Flows from Eden, and it's amazing. One second, let me just see if I can get the title here, because it's this incredible historian could push back against what I'm saying a little bit. So she writes, it's a book called The River Flows from Eden, The Language of Mystical Experience in the Zohar. So keep in mind, just to keep our eyes on the timeline here, the Zohar precedes the Baal Shem Tov by 300 years or something, 300 or 400 years. And so we're in a different world, but I'll paste it into the I should have paid. We should all buy books from Powell's and not from Amazon, but I just out of habit, because it was the first thing that came up in Google, I gave a link to Amazon, but you can find it through Powell's. They'll order it for you. It's really exquisite, this book, and what she does is she Uh, as you can tell in the title, the language of mystical experience in the Zohar, and what she does is she traces um, the actual experience of the people who are in the circle of the Zohar, right? The creators of the Zohar, and so to some extent, their experience in their own lives, their experience of as readers of the text and people trying to understand the Torah becomes central. And so she is interested, as they were interested, in their human experience and what it felt like, and the beautiful experience of cleaving to God. And she gets quite specific in terms of what they wrote about their own experiences, and she tries to imagine a little bit what it was like. So it's not as though before the Baal Shem Tov there were no people who were interested in what it felt like to pray, but the it's just a different order of magnitude, because, for example, when she writes about the language of the mystical experience in the Zohar, she's talking about a tiny group of people, right? The circle of the Zohar is, probably 12 or 13 people. So um, it's a very hard question to answer, and historians struggle to answer this with regard to any, what was it like to be an individual in the medieval period? How did people construct their lives? It's a hard thing to answer. But anyway, it becomes front and center for the Baal Shem Tov, and he's trying to really give people a way to reflect on their own experience and to adjust their own experience, and uh, so that becomes the focus. And what I wanted to say about that is that the theological significance of this is that when we're talking about the divine world, we're talking about the world of perfection, right? We're talking about God's unity and trying to um, demonstrate that God's unity actually exists in a world that appears to us to be highly fragmented, and a world of multiplicity, and a world of suffering, and a world of pain and disorder and chaos. But the Baal Shem Tov, by focusing on the messiness of that world, um, is following the logic of the texts that came before him, of the Kabbalistic texts, which assumed, as I said, that the world only appeared to be messy and disordered, but underneath it all, there was a grand, magnificent unity. And hold on here, I'm trying to make some adjustments to my text so I can share my translation. But the Baal Shem Tov really starts with that world. He starts with the world of messiness and contingency and confusion and obfuscation. That is the world that we all live in, right? Who can wake up in the morning and look around and be like, oh yes, everything is totally part of a magnificent, beautiful harmony, right? That's not. I mean, if you're there, you should be teaching every class, right? If that's how you wake up in the morning, then you should be the rabbi. Um, but the Baal Shem Tov wants to start in that world of messiness and contingency, and um, I'm belaboring this because it's very important to see him. I see him as an innovator, but it's also important to realize that he is very much a branch off of the Kabbalistic tree, the Baal Shem Tov and those who came after him, right? Because um, I hope I've made clear by this point. So the Kabbalah recognizes that in the world there appears to be an absence of divine light, right? In the world of Malchut and below the world of Malchut. And if you're not familiar with Kabbalistic lexicon, that's okay. But in the world of our experience, and in the world of negativity and of sin, it appears that God is absent in human cruelty and brutality and selfishness and egoism and all that. It appears that God isn't there. But the Kabbalah goes to great pains to demonstrate that actually that too is a realm of the divine. But the Baal Shem Tov starts there, right? And he wants to say, what does that look like from the perspective of the human being, right? So let's just look, for example, at number 37. I'll share my screen for those who don't have the, hold on, let me make it a little bigger. Who don't have the book in front of them. My computer's being very slow here. Anyway. Okay, so why doesn't somebody read number 37 from the book? And so again, if you're reading from my screen, don't be surprised that my translation is a little bit different. Number 37 in the book begins at the very bottom of 29. Would somebody read that?
Yeah, I'll read that. It's titled Faith During Periods of Constricted Consciousness. Sometimes one can serve God with only constricted consciousness, not entering into the higher worlds at all. But when one considers that the entire world is filled with his glory, and that one actually is in his presence, albeit presently on the level of a minor, for the consciousness is not currently manifesting in full development. Nonetheless, even in one's minor level service, one may serve with great devotut.
All right, run with great dvekud, right, which means cleaving. So now let's talk about, I just want to remind you this word dvekud, which we've talked about before. Dvekud means cleaving, and one thing that is, that's the word that is used in Hasidism, and it's the appropriate, cleaving is the appropriate translation of the word dvekud. By the way, I think the word glue in Hebrew is devek, or something. It comes from that root, like glue. So it just means to put two things together. And the reason I'm saying that is because in some sense it's not the perfect word, because what we're trying to do with cleaving is not just to bring two separate parts together, which is what you do when you glue something together, but we're trying to dissolve the distinction between them, right? We're trying to unify, right? And so I just wanted to point that out, that what's really happening when we try to cleave to God, what we're really trying to do is to use our own consciousness to negate ourselves, right? To come to the realization, not just intellectually, but with our whole being, that our ego, the thing that makes us us, is actually kind of an illusion. It's an illusion, and because all there is God. So when we think of the word dvekud, we should, I guess you could say there are levels of dvekud. You can come close to. Maybe that's why it is useful to use this word. There are levels of dvekud. There's a level of feeling close to God where you're still you and God is still God, but ultimately disappearing, so to speak, in the divine presence. There is no me and there is no God. There's just God's unity, right? Does that make sense? At least intellectually. So actually, there's this word in. I'll put it up on the screen here. Bet tet lamed, from which comes the word betul. Betul is like it's translated as negation. And so the Hasidim would use it in the sense of like ego nullification. Sometimes it's used for nullification. And Reb Zalman of blessed memory, who I've talked about before, Reb Zalman, I think he rendered this word as like transparent. Like you make yourself transparent because you're just, the divine light is like shining through you without any obfuscations from your ego. Anyway, so that's, I wanted to say that. But let me kind of turn this around and do a question for you. What is it when you're serving with constricted consciousness? In other words, he he says you're serving. Let me see what the Hebrew is, because he doesn't seem to be talking specifically about prayer, but serving God. So he says, Oved Rak Bekatnu. It's he could be talking about prayer here, but either way, you're trying to connect to God, but you're in constricted consciousness, meaning you kind of can't get out of your head. It's not working. You're not feeling it, and you're just so focused on your own experience or having a crappy day or whatever it might be, that you're in constricted consciousness. What does he recommend? I know it's right in front of you, but in your own words, what do you then do? What's his answer to when you're in that state of mind? What should you then do?
I'm not sure I'm exactly getting what he's saying to do, but my idea is kind of like if you find yourself in that state of consciousness, you sort of say to yourself, but God is here anyway.
Right. It's simple. He's saying, and I actually think here my translation makes it a little bit clearer. He renders it, Callis renders it as you should just consider, which has the same thing, but here my translation is a little clearer. You should just think to yourself, or as you said, say to yourself, the whole world is filled with God's presence. Right. And so I'll come back to that in a minute. Sarah Sturz?
Yes. I know that you don't have 37.2, do you? In your
Yeah.
book?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yes. I mean, in my translation, yeah. Go ahead,
Yeah.
but you can read it from the book if you want.
It said, cleave to God's attributes.
Yeah.
When you are in constricted consciousness, as God is compassionate, you be
Right.
compassionate.
Right.
That you're capable of doing,
Yeah.
even when you aren't in a higher level of consciousness.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and I want to come to that in a moment, because that's another strategy, so to speak. But the first thing that I want to emphasize is that is the power of thought. Right? This is not just a throwaway. He's going to come back to this again and again and again. That the human realm of thought is this nexus, this meeting point of the human and of the cosmos. And that's a huge plus for us. That's a really ridiculous way to say it, but because we can, at least in many moments, we can control our thoughts. And if you just think the whole world is filled with presence, and I think he's saying something more than, just say that sentence to yourself once. I think he's like really trying to get you to really imagine what is that like. The whole world is filled with God's presence. Then, even though that's a kind of limited approach in a sense, it can actually lead you to great cleaving. So what's so amazing about that, and what's so important about that for us, but also just, to take note of the historical change that the Baal Shem Tov represents, is that you don't need Share Ora. You don't need Jikatilia's, dissertation on the divine names. You don't need the Zohar. I mean, I don't think the Baal Shem Tov would have said it like this, but you don't have to be able to be, I guess he would say, you don't have to master those books. You don't have to master the elaborate Kabbalistic kavanot that he himself and other masters would use to cleave to God. You can use human thought, ordinary human thought.
Yeah. Josh?
Yeah.
Hey, so what's striking me as we're going through this is just how much of this we just find in the Siddur. Because I mean, in every morning service, we say Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot, Melech Haaretz Kivodo.
Right.
And I just think, there it is. And right towards more the beginning, before we get to the Amidar, or any of that area of the service, we all say that. I'm thinking of like a different reason, when we do the the tiptoe thing for Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. It's almost, it's like we're getting this amazing formula,
Right.
holy, holy, holy. And and we rise with each one. And then we say that, the whole world is filled with your glory,
Right.
which to me is like that, taking it even a step further than it's filled with your presence.
Right.
But say it's filled with your glory. It's
Right.
like,
It's like
wow, that's
this like shining luminescence. Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Right. I mean, one of the beautiful gifts of the Baal Shem Tov, and really all the Kabbalistic works, but it comes through in the Best here especially, is that these are lines that are in the Siddur, right, and throughout our tradition, and he's just highlighting them and saying, look, this really means something. Like, the whole world is filled with God's presence or glory, and so you should think about that. Use your thought as a way, and here's where I really want to make it touch the Kabbalah. Use your thought to realize, and I mean that in both senses of the word, to make clear to yourself, but also to manifest through your experience that the whole world is filled with God's presence, and that therefore, whatever you are experiencing, in when you're experiencing constricted consciousness, right? You're praying, and all you can think about is like, when is this going to be done? Or you are thinking about the fact that your knee hurts, or you need another cup of coffee, whatever it might be. All of that, says the Besht, is within Melochol Haaretz Kivodo. All of that is part of the whole world is filled with God's presence. Now, when you're focusing on that thing, it doesn't mean you're focusing on your knee or your coffee or whatever. It doesn't mean that's where your mind ought to be. But he's saying those things are within this realm of frustrated human experience is where you can access Hashem. But you have to use your thought to get there. And so thought becomes an instrument almost of its own negation, in the sense of thought. The individual. My computer's about to run out of batteries. What happened? Hold on. The individual, from this place of individuality and self and constricted consciousness, can open up the world to the realization of God's omnipresence, and thereby begin to negate that place of ego by realizing that God is actually everywhere. Okay, does that make sense? Sarah, I do want to come to what you said, to 37.2, but first I want to leap forward to number 40, because we're going to see this a little bit here as well. So would somebody want to read number 40 out loud from the book, which is, and also give us a page number if you would.
32.
Page 32. Somebody want to read number 40?
I'll read it.
Great.
One ought not say, when I will be able to pray with enthusiasm, then I will pray. And if not, I will not force myself to pray. Quite the contrary. Consider the parable of the king who goes to war in disguise. Those who know him recognize him through the way he moves, and those who are not so familiar with him recognize his presence when they notice that there are many guards about and conclude that the king must be close by. So too, when you are not able to pray, it is because the king is being heavily guarded so as not to be revealed. Realizing this, that the king is indeed here, but in hiding, you should greatly reinforce your effort.
Okay. So what the heck is going on in this thing? Who wants to try to put this in your ordinary words? This is not the metaphor that we would probably reach for to try to explain whatever it is that he's trying to explain. A king's battlefield movements. But who can try to just translate this from English to English? You want to take a crack at it?
Well, I would say that just because if you're waiting for the difficulty to dissipate, it may not happen. at the time that there's a difficulty, you should realize that maybe at that time God is just hidden, and now it's time to, and with that understanding, then you can move forward.
Right.
In other words,
Beautiful.
God is just as present as always, but maybe hidden.
Beautiful. Yeah, perfect. Exactly right. So there might be moments when you really have a real a real aliyah of the soul. Like you really feel like, oh, I forgot myself for a half hour or for 10 minutes or even a minute. Like what a great relief! I wasn't all I was thinking about was just divine energy moving through me. But then there are other moments where and I dare say for most of us, most of the moments of our prayer or of our ordinary experience, we don't feel God around us. And the Baal Shem Tov says again, I want to really, I know I'm belaboring this, but it's really important. He's just logically extending the teachings of the Kabbalah. Um, that feeling of absence, which is sometimes just anxiety producing, sometimes frustrating, sometimes a cause of terrible despair. The apparent absence of order, of harmony, of beauty, the absence of God in our lives is not something that should lead us to the conclusion that God is not here. Because in God's hiddenness, God is here, right? You're sensing divine hiddenness is sensing an aspect of the divine, that aspect of divine hiddenness, which now again, changing channels for a minute to go back to the Kabbalah, we've talked about Tzimtzum, we've talked about the realm of Din. And again, if you don't know what that stuff means, it's all good. You'll be able to, I'll meet you on the other end, or you'll be able to get some sense from this anyway. Those are all within the divine. They're divine concealment, but they are acts of the divine. And even that concealment, Melo Chol Haaretz Kavado, the entire world, including in the concealment, is filled with God's glory, just different aspects of the divine. And so he says, what's amazing about it is that he says, what's so powerful is that it's not just that if you don't feel God's presence, it's okay, God is still there. He's saying that feeling of absence is just more evidence of God's presence. I mean, it's an astonishing, in a way, it could be a very frustrating teaching, but and this is a separate point that we're going to talk about a little bit, but and that is the relationship between absence and presence in the thinking of the Besht. Um, but here, I just want to emphasize that he is talking about our experience, our ordinary human experience, and putting that front and center as the object of his concern. Okay.
It sounds to me that I think as we're going through this of being in a gym when you first get there and trying to exercise and just feeling that it is not your day and this isn't this is just, oh my God, what am I doing?
Right.
And then but you work through that,
Mm-hmm.
and so many times you're rewarded, but not always. Sometimes it just continues that way and your whole workout seems like that. But
Yeah.
and other times it doesn't. Other times you really get into it, your endorphins are going and you're stronger than you were before, and you have just a great workout.
Right. I would say that analogy works, but I would just want to tweak it a little bit because he's saying, I think he's not just saying hang in there and push through. I think he's saying in the ickiness, in that feeling of like, oh God, this isn't working. What am I doing? He's saying that is actually part of the enjoyment of
God is
exercise. That is
God is there too.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so when you feel the frustration and the emptiness, that is evidence of God's presence. Um, but of course, he doesn't just say, sorry, what number was that? 40? Yeah. He doesn't say, just rest there with the presence, right? He says, um, what does he say in the Callus translation? Fortify yourself or summon your strength or something like that. Um, In other words, he's saying don't give up. The God is in that very, God's absence is an indication of God's presence, and so you must not give up. So now, when he says strengthen yourself, I think in the Hebrew it's lihitchazek or something like that. That he doesn't say specifically what that means. So I think he means just like keep going with an open heart and the realization that you're in God's presence. Okay. So let me see here. Then also, I'll make one more point on this, on the human being central, and then I'll leave it because it'll be the centrality of human experience will be implicit in the rest of whatever else we talk about. Um, so in a very, very different way here, let's somebody read number 50. This is sort of like coming down to earth a little bit. If somebody would read number 50 and give us a page number for that. It's page 48. Can somebody read number 50 on page 48?
The prayer leader and the congregation, honest expression versus forced charisma. I heard in the name of the Baal Shem Tov of blessed memory, who said it is a great transgression on the part of a prayer community when it happens that the designated leader of the prayers is not lingering with song in prayer recitation, but the community forces such lingering in their prayers, thereby preventing the prayer leader from conducting the affluence with inner honesty. Or if he or she must wait until the congregation finishes their prayers, the prayer leader's concentrated attention may dissipate, and he or she won't have the power of presence so as to conduct affluence to the Shekhinah. Therefore, congregants must take care not to cause this to come about, heaven forfend, because they will lose much good thereby. This being so, be carefully aware, for the working through of the relationship between prayer leader and congregation is great, and the matter of collaborative comportment is serious.
Okay. So obviously this is a very, very different tenor, but I should point out that this is not really the problem we have at Congregation Sharing Torah. The example should probably be the opposite direction. When the congregation is ready to move on and the cantor wants to keep singing Nigunim with Aaron, God bless his beautiful voice, that tends to be more of the way it works. But in any event, the point is made that you have this. I guess the larger point I'm using this, and I don't want to spend too much time on this one, but I'm using this just again as another example of the centrality of the experience of human of prayer, the centrality of human experience in the theology of the Baal Shem Tov. It matters. It's central, right? And he's elevating the human realm and its importance in a way that was not done before him. The internal experience of the individual and the community. And one thing that's worth exploring here that is hidden, and I feel like it's concealed a little bit more in Callis's translation. He has that very felicitous phrase, conduct affluence with inner honesty. What's a little concealed there, and he brings it out later, is that what he's saying is that that the shots, the shliach tzibor, the prayer leader, is actually flowing, becoming a node, becoming a point of conducting flow to the Shekhinah, right, to the divine presence. And that's such an important point, and well within the playground, so to speak, or the defined area of Kabbalah. This is something the Kabbalists talk about as well. Is that and this is actually central. This is a primary point of Kabbalistic teaching. It's that it's not just that we're receiving from on high the divine energy, that we ourselves, just as everything in the universe is part of the divine energy field, so to speak. And so the question is whether we are contributing to that flow or stepping outside of the flow. And so when the Shliach Tzibur when the prayer leader is really in it, they are allowing that flow to go back into Shekhinah, right? And so if the congregation is sort of like forcing the Shliach Tzibur is like trying to bring the Yotzer Or to an end, but the congregation is really into the singing and they want to keep doing it, they're screwing it up. They're really causing damage, because the Shliach Tzibur is the one who's really mediating the flow of spiritual energy to the Shekhinah. And if he, or now we could say she, gets thrown off, then that stops. And then what you have, and I want to draw this out because this becomes very important for something else we'll talk about a little bit later. Then what you have is a bunch of people who are singing and they're enjoying themselves, but that's not the same as being a node for the flow of the divine energy, right? So the fact that they're singing and they're really into it doesn't necessarily mean that they're accomplishing what prayer needs to be or can be. Anne?
As I was reading those parts of chapter 3, I was trying to figure out where we stand on individual prayer versus praying in a group, because you're supposed to not be distracted by the people around you and not even so aware of the people around you, but wrapped up in this connection with the divine. And yet you're relying on a prayer leader, which means that you're relying on the fact that there are at least 10 of you in the room. And I'm not sure there isn't a which is better. You're supposed to be alone in a group.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it. Yeah, but I would say I would say this, that first of all, remember that that the reason for the last bit where he says, essentially he says the Shliach Tzibor and the congregation have to really get this right, like they got to work this out, because ultimately it is the Shliach Tzibor needs the community and the community needs the Shliach Tzibor, right? So they have to get that together apart thing down, right? So that's one thing. But I would say that I think the better answer to your wonderful question is that Jews have to understand that tefillah in a minyan is essential, but it's only part of the spiritual life of the individual, right? So we have the beautiful privilege of praying in a minyan because that's something that has to happen spiritually. We have to be able to contribute to the flow of divine energy in this realm, and a prayer minyan is how we do that. But there are many other occasions where a person can pray or meditate or do hitbodedut, and that flexes different muscles and maybe even makes the prayer more quote unquote meaningful, right? It just might be that prayer within a minyan for a particular individual is not going to be quote unquote personally meaningful, to use terrible 21st century constructs. But that's okay. You got to do it. You got to be part of it, and then you can have that experience, and you must have that other experience in other realms at other times. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't get to choose one over the other.
That's right. We're supposed to do both. And I will say, let me just a little bit, maybe going at the risk of going off topic a little bit. I think that this is actually a major. This is a something that really has to be addressed by the Jewish community, um, because people come to prayer services with the expectation that those prayer services are going to be everything, right? Like this is like it's Friday night, I'm at shul, this is my chance to connect to God. And now, lo and behold, the rabbi's talking about some stupid thing I don't care about, and the cantor is like going on and on and on with the nigunim, and the person next to me doesn't know anything, and they're mumbling and they're blowing into their handkerchief. Like, what? These people have screwed up my prayer experience, and there's terrible frustration, and that comes from, I think, the error of seeing the synagogue as the central point of Jewish life, which is a terrible error.
But then
That-
there's the error on the other side too, which is the people who, certain offspring of mine included, who are not going to synagogue at all because they feel like their
Yep.
individual prayer is enough for them.
Yeah, right. The too cool for shul problem, and that's a real danger of contemporary Jewish spirituality. Is and certainly not invented by this generation by any means, but that's a real problem. I mean, they don't have to go to the synagogue, but they need to be part of some. I mean, if they want to be in line with the Jewish tradition, they need to be contributing to Shekhinah through a minyan.
I'll give you his phone number.
Yeah, I'm sure he needs advice from me. Okay.
Question to me
Yeah.
is when the prayer leader is role is to bring the congregation with him or her, or whether he just concentrates on the spirituality and what's the purpose of the congregation.
That was my question also, is sometimes if you have I'm not saying there's good and bad prayer leaders, but a prayer leader who's cognizant of the congregation, even if they're kind of going rogue, getting ahead, it's their, to me, it's the job of the prayer leader then to take that energy and bring it towards God. And to bring everybody together in a group to do.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, being a real shliach tzibur is, I mean, it's an art. I mean, it's a science, it's an art, it's incredibly difficult. We are blessed to have in Aaron, you can tell people love davening with Aaron, I think, because he's not there to play games. Like when Aaron is davening, he's really davening. And, granted, like any cantor, he's not the perfect cantor for everybody. Not everyone loves his melodies, yada, yada, yada. But when Aaron is davening, he's really davening. Like he's really, by looking at him, and I can assure you from knowing him very well and knowing behind the scenes, the guy is not messing around. He's actually trying to cleave to Hashem. And that's just part of it. But, and then the Chazan also has that other need to bring the congregation together with her, and which is, that's very difficult. But I would say, just sort of underscoring my point, a lot of Chazans get this wrong, or they don't know how to do it, or whatever. But this is not the be all and end all of your religious experience. There's Torah study, which the Besh talks about a lot. There's meditation, hitbodedut. I mean, there's a million other things that one needs to do if one wants to develop a relationship with the one. And prayer in a minyan is really a small part of a person's spiritual world, I would say. That's how we should think about it.
I've often wondered how a spiritual leader can do two things at the same time. One is to reach holiness, and two is to make sure that the congregation is with you. You have to have kind of a split consciousness. Seems to me. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, honestly, really, one of the reasons that one of the many reasons that I'm stepping back, and this is not the primary reason, but when I don't know. That's a thing that rabbis very often need to be able to do, and it's just a developed skill that some people have, some people don't, and I don't know how to do it. It's incredibly difficult. So anyway, I want to move on here because I want to get to another topic. Okay, so we've talked about the centrality of human experience. We've talked about the Besh being an extension, really, of a logical extension of the Kabbalah. We've talked about the power of thought a little bit, and this idea, and I want to drill down on this a little bit more on the power of thought or the centrality of thought. Let's look at number 41, because this is something that comes up again and again, and we can't overstate the importance of this in the thought of the Baal Shem Tov. So if somebody would read number 41, which is on page
32. 32.
32.
Okay. Being in the presence of one's thoughts, also in constricted consciousness. When one is in constricted consciousness, it should also be with great adhesion to the divine presence, Shekhinah. Then in one instant, one can think of the higher worlds and immediately find oneself in those higher dimensions. For in accordance with where a person thinks, this is where one finds oneself. And if he or she would not be in the higher world, he or she would not have been able to think in that dimension at all.
Okay. So this is such a huge point. So one, I translated it as one is where one's thoughts are. Ooh, those colors are terrible together. But anyway, one is where one's thoughts are. He says that, and actually it's I'm missing the emphatic there. He says, I don't know if it's there or just in the next one. Let me just see. What number is that? 41? Hold on real quick.
41.
Yeah, no, it doesn't say it there, but elsewhere it says one is entirely where one's thoughts are. He doesn't say that here, but he says it in some of the accompanying teachings and the decimalized teachings that follow. This is a very big deal, and we don't have time to really talk about too much how this relates to the Kabbalah. But remember, if you've studied the Kabbalah, remember that the world of mochin, of the minds, which refers to the upper three sphirot, like those dimensions of God that are closest to the primal source of unity before it becomes overly variegated into the world of multiplicity. Those are called mochin, or mind. That is keter, chokhmah, and bina, right? Those are like they're like the mind, insofar as they are like the conceptual framework for reality. Right? To use the analogy, if you imagine God as a being, right, like as a human, just for the sake of drawing out this analogy, before God articulates the world into existence, God has the concept, the notion of the world and what it's going to look like, right? And then after that, God begins to create the world in all of its messiness and multiplicity as we know it, the world of our experience. The process of, as we climb the spherotic tree, or as we come closer to God through meditation or contemplation, we get closer and closer to the mochin, to the divine mind. So that if you remember in the book Share Ora, in that Kabbalistic work, The Gates of Light, when we get to Bina, right? Bina is kind of like the highest level we can get to. And Bina is the source of like overflowing, constant, renewing unity that, washes away all imperfections. And that's why Bina is associated with Teshuvah, right? When we can get to that point of contemplating the divine point where all things flow from God's conception, just in the beginning of reality. It's like standing at this perfect ever-flowing stream, and that point of teshuvah is like we're touching the mochin, we're almost touching the divine mind, almost, not quite. Um, and so when he says where your thoughts are is where you are, he's not just giving this like lovely phrase, like, you got to be really present, otherwise you're not paying attention, and you're not going to be where you need to be. He's saying something more than that. He's saying human consciousness, the human mind, has the capacity to transform reality. If you think about, if you can contemplate divine unity, you are participating in that unity. So it's a crazy idea. I mean, crazy in the very best sense, that if anything, it's sort of the opposite of how in the West, or at least in America, how we're conditioned to think about the world, right? If we can't touch, see, or feel something, if we can't make it actually happen in the physical world of embodiment, it's not real for us. We don't believe it. But for the Baal Shem Tov, it's the opposite. If it's not happening in your mind, it's not real. And if it is happening in your mind, it is real. So the way that we actualize unity is we participate in the divine unity by bringing our thoughts into that realm. Wherever our minds are is where we are. So Michael earlier mentioned that moment in the Kedusha, which we're all longing to be able to say again when we can once again have an actual minyan and meet in person, where we say Kadosh, 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 right? And we stand up on our tippy toes. If your mind is in that realm, like fully, like you're not just saying the words, but you're actually in that realm of Kadosh, 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 and realizing that God's holiness that God's presence is everywhere, well, you really are actualizing that and allowing that to happen. And so the mind, the realm of thoughts, becomes totally central to the work of the Baal Shem Tov, because that's how we transform reality. Now, is it enough to just therefore contemplate? Oh, good, I can just think about divine unity, and then we've done Tikkun Olam, and we can all go home like Mashiach will come. No, obviously, but he says elsewhere, if you remember. I know I'm rambling a bit here. I'll shut up in a minute and see if there are questions or comments. Thanks, Lenny. So he says elsewhere, I think in chapter 2, he talks about the fact that that everything starts with thought, and that speech. If you remember that bit about how the letters are the souls of the words, right? And everything begins with, but behind that even is the realm of thought, and everything starts with thought, and then speech follows from thought. Yeah, it's in chapter 2. So that idea means that the thoughts are how we begin to locate ourselves in the realm that we need to be in, and then of course our actions matter. To put it mildly, of course our actions are central, right? The world of mitzvah, the world where we're actually enacting the divine will, and we're enacting unity by visiting people who are sick, and by giving tzedakah, and by acts of kindness, and all these things. Those are essential, but we initiate the unity of the divine and the human by getting there in the realm of thought. Questions, comments on this? Anything to add, or anything I didn't address on this bit? Yeah, Lenny.
I have a quick. First of all, I wasn't being critical. I meant to say you're really on a roll. You're not rambling.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry, I've had some technical difficulties, so I might be a little bit left behind. One of the things that I don't understand in here is in 41, though it seems like you've moved on a little bit. The last sentence says he or she would not have been able to think, and then he has this odd bracketed expression here, which completely changes the meaning as in that dimension at all. So I think there's a big difference between he would not be able to think and not be able to think in that dimension.
Yeah. Let me just look at the Hebrew.
Brackets? I don't understand that.
Yeah, let me just look at the Hebrew. What is it, 41, Marin? Yeah.
41, the last sentence in it.
Yeah, I mean, v'im lo haya ba'olam elyon, and if the person were not in the upper world, lo haya mechashev klal, he would not think at all, is literally what it says. Yeah, I think you've picked up on, I'm not sure, because I'm not sure about this, but I think you may have picked up on something really important that actually that relates to what I was saying before, which is that, and this is when you got kicked off technologically, which is that the upper realms are called the realm of mochin, the realm of mind, the realm of thought, like the keter, chokhmah, and bina. And I wonder if he's saying that it is those upper realms that give us the capacity for thought, right? Those divine realms, we encounter those when we think. And if those divine upper realms didn't exist, We wouldn't be thinking beings. I wonder if he's saying something like that, and the brackets that Callis has introduced here really mess that up. In order to know that for sure, I would have to read the commentary. There's a commentary called Mayim Chaim, which is actually which means like living waters, which is a commentary on the Baal Shem Tov, which actually is on Sepharia in Hebrew. And I've found that a lot of the times that I think Callis is wrong, it's because after I read those commentaries, I find out that he's actually right.
Right, because there's a huge gap in those two.
Yeah, say more. Say more. Just clarify what you think the gap is.
Well, I think that the gap is that if you're not in the higher, what the direct translation would be is, if you aren't in the higher world, this is like the very beginning of what you were talking about. If God is hidden, right? But just because he's hidden doesn't mean he's not there.
Right.
In the same way, if you didn't have roots in the higher world, you wouldn't be able to think at all.
Right.
You wouldn't be able to think about the higher worlds at all, but you wouldn't be able to
think. Right. Thinking is tapping into the higher worlds.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And therefore what's nice about that angle is that therefore you should be careful what you think about, or better, like, don't waste your thoughts. Right? Thoughts are a gate to the Holy of Holies in a sense. And if you sit around thinking about, video games or celebrities or golf, no offense to anybody who likes those things. By the way, I play video games, so I'm not waving my finger at anybody. What are you doing? You're taking a diamond and you're using it to, like, I don't know, carve dirty words into the wall. Like, what a waste. Yeah, that's a great. I'm really glad you caught that. What?
I was just going to say, did you feel a need to confess to us when you said that you played?
Yes, I play this game, Red Dead Redemption, which is absolutely unbelievable, and I've decided to stop because it's not good for my soul, but it's an amazing game. Anyway, that's for another time. So, yeah. So thank you, Lenny, for discovering that. Okay, I want to talk about one other essential thing.
Rabbi?
Yes, sir.
One other thought process. One thing I loved about this teaching is it's almost a Musar practice to be in that state of consciousness. I mean, people do everything. You're not just going to be at shul praying or anywhere, just even studying Torah. You're going to be in the real world.
Yeah.
To be in a state of consciousness where you realize there's a connection with Hashem all the time, it will change your whole attitude, how you and see Hashem and other people too. It'll change your attitude of how you deal with people on a daily basis and routine and mundane matters.
Beautiful, absolutely. I'm hesitating here only because I'm looking for this other teaching that resonates with what you're saying, and now I don't think I can find it. But yeah, exactly. I mean, that's beautiful, and it's easy to lose track of this in this book, because this book is so focused on tefillah and prayer study, right? This section of the Baal Shem Tov's writing that we're doing a deep dive on is so focused on the explicitly spiritual realms of tefillah and Torah study that we can lose sight of the fact that all of this applies to just ordinary conduct, right? And how we interact with other people in the world and bringing that awareness to it. So I know what I was thinking of was the teaching that I promised to come back to that Sarah mentioned that I never came back to, which is the idea that if you're having trouble in your prayer, I think this is number 38, but in any event, it doesn't matter. If you're having trouble in your prayer and you're in the constricted consciousness, focus on the divine attributes, he says, right? So God is merciful, so you can be merciful. God is patient, so you can be patient, right? Now, he then takes it to the next level where he draws an analogy, or he returns to this analogy between God's attributes and the words and the letters of the prayer. But, he for sure wants us to be able to bring this consciousness into everything we're doing and not just prayer, so that it should infuse, exactly as you said, like a Musar practice, that it should infuse all of our interactions with people. So, Yasher Koach, thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so, and Sarah, thank you for bringing that teaching up, because I knew that it had an important place in what we're doing. So then there is this interesting, there's so much here. It's just like an embarrassment of riches. Okay, so, okay, I felt like I was going to return to, but I guess we have talked about it. And I guess we did spend some time on it, but I want to just make sure you walk away from this lesson with the idea that God's absence is presence, right? This is so central to the Baal Shem Tov, right? And we did talk about that in the context of prayer, but it's in the context of everything. When we feel that gnawing sense of anxiety and fear and hurt and pain and woundedness and darkness, that is caused by or catalyzed by God's apparent absence, that Baal Shem Tov says, no, that is a signal that God is very near, that God is everywhere, because that there's no place devoid of God. And when you sense God's absence, it means simply that God is wearing additional garments, and that at those moments you can rest assured that God is there. Now that may be, small comfort to us when we're really in those moments of suffering, but it's actually a fundamentally important point. And one of the things that gets to, I'm going to use this as a bridge to talk about a different concept. One of the things that means is that your emotional experience of the world and of God's presence in it is not necessarily to be trusted. And so I want to focus now on these teachings that almost have like a very different flavor than the rest of the teachings. Is it 44? Hold on one second. One moment here. Okay, yeah, let's look at number 44. Now these teachings, I think all of these that we're going to talk about here, oh no, they don't all come from the Maggid. They come also from other students of the Baal Shem Tov. But somebody read number 44 if you would. 44, which begins on page 37. So this is a little bit long. So, but somebody want to read that? Go, Sarah Sturts. Go ahead.
True love and awe distinguished from 1, self-perceptions due to metabolic predisposition, and 2, self-induced emotions. There are those who pray in despondency due to an excess of black bile overcoming them.
Okay, so we can just sort of set aside the 18th century medical diagnoses here, but to get the larger point.
And think that they are praying with great awe. Likewise, there are those who think that they have prayed out of their great love of the Creator, but it was due to their overworked red bile. However, if one is in a state of love of God, and out of this a sense of self-effacement descends onto him or her, and one wants to bring glory to the blessed name and be victorious over the evil inclinations for his sake, then it's good. Because one is not regarded as serving divinity unless both love and awe are present. Observe how it is that awe befalls you. I refer here not to the fear and awe that you arouse within yourself, for this is considered to be the rising of feminine waters. The true awe, however, is experienced as being seized by a shuddered trembling, and out of the awe of sudden realization, one loses orientation momentarily and does not know where one is. Its result is experienced as one's awareness becoming purified, and at times tears well up of themselves. But when it is not like this, although it appears that she or he loves the Creator, it's nothing. Because this is the gateway to God. Awe is the gateway to love. And if one does not enter through the gate of awe, it is impossible that one can be in a true state of love. And we know that her husband is known in the gates when one is, quote, within the gate, within fear. Then the Blessed Holy One unites with him or her because, quote, the way of the man is to pursue the woman. And the Blessed Holy One is called the man who seeks out one who has divine awe, who is called the woman. The woman in awe of God, she shall be praised. And thereby one is regarded as with God, for a portion of God is his nation. And one who does not know the likeness of this isn't even a servant of God, and is certainly not on the level of those upon whom the awe dawns, and does not render the service worthy of a Jew at all. Such a one serves the blessed name only out of having been trained in this way, but imagines himself or herself as actually serving the blessed name and serving him with joy. But this is merely the joy of excitation. Therefore, return to God with all your heart and with all your effort.
Yeah, so I remember now, he has a whole paragraph in there that I didn't have in the Hebrew, so I don't know. It's not in his own Hebrew that he has in the book, so I'm not sure what happened there. But there's so much in this teaching, and we're not going to be able to do it justice. But there's a couple of things. Okay, a couple of things that I want to emphasize. One is that there is in the contemporary presentation of Hasidism, which is often such a cheapened version of Hasidism, there's this always an emphasis on love and joy, right? These are good things. I'm all for love and joy, but the typical like painting of the Hasid who's like smiling and dancing in a circle, and very often like we think like, oh yeah, if you're like really spiritual, you always got a smile on your face, and you're jumping up and down. Like that's how you know that you really understand Jewish spirituality, because you know how to smile and jump and wear a big knit kippah. But what comes through in these teachings is the centrality of Yirah, and of Yirah, which is a very I can't find a single English word to use to translate it. I actually put something out on Facebook asking various friends and knowledgeable people to give me suggestions. There is not a single word, because Yirah does mean awe, but it also conveys fear and even terror. And he says that you must have yirah. You must, if you want to come to a love of God and you really want to cleave to God, you have to walk through the gate of yirah. You have to try to summon this awareness of your own tininess and your mortality and the illusion of your very being, and the fact that you don't even really exist, because none of us do, because we're all just part of this vast infinite unity, and to really grapple with what that means in your experience and your life and your perception of the world, and your ambitions and how you spend your time on this earth. That is a centrally important idea for the Baal Shem Tov, and for any Jewish teaching. It's not just about laughing and dancing and drinking schnapps, although those are all highly recommended things. Okay, so that's one thing. And Collis translated this word as self-effacement. I kept it as shame, because I think that shame has a power that self-effacement does not. I think that yirah leads to a sense of shame, but shame does have this pejorative that Collis is probably trying to avoid with his self-effacement. And I think I don't know, it's not pejorative, but this just sense of in moments of your life when you've kind of been able to see who you are from a higher perspective, it's often accompanied with a sense of embarrassment, that you've been in this state of illusion, and suddenly, oh my God, I've spent the last decade thinking X, and it's actually not X. And that often gives us a real sense of shame, which can be an unbelievable gift. But in any event, so Yira leads to that, and he says you need awe and love together. You must have awe and love together. You have to carry both of those. Now, the part of this that I think is so interesting and is echoed in other teachings is the fact that he seems to be saying that if this is just an emotional experience, right? If it just comes from your own excitement, right, from the excess of red bile, or we might just say, I don't know, what would it be in today's terms? Like,
Passion.
yeah, your passion or your hormones are out of whack, and so you or literally like you drank too much coffee and you go in and you're just so jazzed by the prayer, you're just loving it. He seems to be saying, I'm not positive I'm reading him right because it's so out of tune with other things that he's said. Um, that ain't it. That ain't it. It's not just about whatever excitement or depression that happens to be passing through you, right? So it's interesting, and I'm belaboring this because I think it appears to be paradoxical or contradictory to other things he says. Like he says on the one hand that your experience and what you're perceiving is central, and you have to address it and to move through it and to grasp God in that realm. But he's also seems to be saying here the fact that you feel something in the realm of emotion, whether you know good or bad, doesn't mean that that's actually divine service, and that you have to kind of rise above it. And here maybe this is where thought comes back into it, although he doesn't emphasize thought as much here. And the result is that it puts you in a place of self scrutiny that is very challenging. And I'm not sure about this, but I think for those who are interested, I think that the branch of the Hasidic tree that grows towards Simcha Bunim of Pazietzna and the Kotzker Rebbe, I think comes off of this like this relentless self-doubt and self-examination and doubting. I perceive that I'm coming close to God, but I have to keep digging down and doubt even that, because the real fear of God is beneath all of this illusion, and my own consciousness shouldn't be trusted. And you sort of disintegrate the self by this ruthless self-scrutiny and examination. I do wonder if it comes off of this stream of thinking of the Baal Shem Tov. But in any event, just because we feel something doesn't mean it's real. And I think that therefore our thought becomes the really central in our cleaving to God. Um, and through thought we can access yira and ahava, awe or fear, and love of God. And once we do that, then we kind of self-transform, and then I believe it's like we elevate our emotions, we elevate our sensual experience once we've grounded them in the divine reality. So why does this matter to us? Why does this matter? Well, I think that the reason that this, practically speaking, that this matters is because we live in a moment. When I say a moment, I mean a couple 100-year moment, and we live in a culture that measures everything by the barometer of human experience and human emotion. If it makes us feel good, it's good. If it excites us, it's worthy of our attention and the attention of millions of eyeballs, and all of the rest. And this also has affected the world of contemporary spirituality. And very often we measure spiritual experiences by how good they make us feel. And all of us do this. How can you not? Like very, very often people will choose their Jewish home, their Jewish community, by which shul has the grooviest music. And I'm not, I've been there myself, and I'm not pointing my finger at anybody. When I was in New York, we lived near B'nai Jeshurun in New York, and we went to B'nai Jeshurun. Why? Because they had awesome music. Now, it so happens they also happen to have wonderful rabbis who are very smart and great. But my point is, if we confuse spiritual insight with our perceptions of what's pleasurable to ourselves or what feels real to ourselves, we're in very dangerous territory. And so we need to make sure that there's an integrity and an honesty and that we're truly reaching out and in search of something greater than just what seems real to us. I think that that's what the best is. Well, it's really the Magi here, the Magi of Mezrich, who gives voice to this teaching. I think that's what he's after. Questions, comments? Sarah, and then I think Lenny had his hand up.
I'm only going to just move on to something different because I'm afraid that it won't be reached today.
Okay.
And we
That's
don't
good.
always revisit.
Yep.
Okay. And that is when I got to paragraph or topic 54, it left me going, huh? That was the one about silent screaming.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that for a couple of minutes?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, so let's hold 1 second. Let me just see. Did somebody have a question on what thing we just read and talked about? Okay. Lenny, did you?
I just wanted to say something kind of in summation about,
Okay.
which was that in the first class, you said that one of the criticisms about Judaism is that it doesn't have a consistent theology. And, you know, one time in Boulder, maybe I was just being a smart aleck, but I said, you really have to believe in God to be a good Jew, right? I mean, kosher, shomer Shabbos, you daven, you read the Pirkei Avot and try and practice those things, you're a good Jew.
Right.
You have to believe in God. But this is the first time here where you would say, I would say that's not true. That's not accurate. So in a way, this is kind of where the theology really starts to veer away.
Yeah.
I could have been wrong in the first place, and people argued, well, why would you want to be a Jew if you don't believe in God? Well, because you're a Jew.
Listen, I think experientially you're absolutely right. I think that you know, I think there are a lot of people even in the Orthodox world who don't really know how God fits in, and they may not believe in God, but they love the community, they love the learning, and you know, and I think that this is one of the reasons that Hasidism has had such a re-explosion or a rebirth in the 20th century, 20th and 21st century, is that it forced people to confront the absence of divinity within their Yiddishkeit, within their Judaism. So yeah, you cannot really, you can be a student of Hasidism, like in an academic sense, and not have any relationship to God, but you can't really be into Hasidism without, you know, God. There's just, it doesn't make any sense. It's, I mean, that's what it is. And now it has a language, you're talking about God, that many people find alien or very welcome, depending on their background. But it's all God all the time. So to go to number 54 now. The most sense I can make of this. Well, do you want to read that, Sarah? You want to read it out loud really quickly?
Sure. It's called concentration as silent screaming. One needs to learn how to be accustomed to say even the songs of praise, the Sukkah de Zimra, with a low voice, but to scream in silence. Say the word, whether in prayer or in study, with all of your might, as it is written, all of my bones declare, who is like unto you, my Lord? And the outcry arising from Devachut should be in silence.
Yeah. So I think that it looks like I didn't translate 55, and I don't know why, but I think if we look at 56, and in the interest of, if we look at 56, Oh no, sorry, this is 55. Okay, so let's look at 55. And I think that if we read 54 and 55 together, then we might be able to get what he's getting at. So I'll read 55. Sometimes it is proper to serve the blessed name with one's soul only, meaning to say, by one's consciousness alone, while the body stays in place, so that one not overexert the body. Now we all, you all know what he's talking about, right? He's talking about Jews who are moving their bodies a lot. Now we only see this, right? in certain contexts, like that sometimes I daven in this way, sometimes I don't. You've seen it elsewhere, but I think there were all kinds of body movements that were part of the Hasidic world that we don't even know about anymore. And there, some of which are also referred to in the Talmud, by the way. But in any event, sometimes one is able to recite one's prayers with love and awe and enthusiasm, but without any outward bodily movement. From the perspective of another person watching, it would appear that one is praying without any devekut, right? Because everybody knows, like, if you really are close to God, you're moving your body back and forth. Like, that's how a real Jew prays, right? So he's saying it looks like that person isn't praying with any cleaving to God or devekut. You can succeed in this only if you are in a deep state of devekut. Then you may serve him only with your soul through great transcending love. Such service is best and ascends more quickly. That is, like, it brings you into unity with God more quickly, with greater devekut to the blessed name than enthusiastic prayer that is observable by outer bodily expression. And the prayer of the soul is beyond the grasp of the klipot, which I'll explain in a second, because it is an entirely inward practice. So, Sarah, I think that if you read 54 in light of 55, I think that they're getting at something similar, which is that the 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 body, whether it's by the loud voice or whether it's by bodily movements, is sometimes how people might engage in prayer, right? Because we're moving our bodies, we're singing, we're being loud, it feels good. But the realm of the physical is ultimately a klipa. It's a vessel for divine light, right? The thing itself, God is not literally this piece of meat on the end of my arm or this, my chest. Like, really, the part that is most connected to God is my neshama, is my soul. And the neshama is silent. Now, the neshama can cause me to speak out loud and it can cause me to move, but I think he's trying to say, don't get caught up in overly caught up in the physical realm and think that is actually the essence of the connection with God. The essence is the neshama, which you should be able to access through stillness and silence. I think that's what he's saying. So our time is up, but I actually, for those who want to hang around for a moment, I wanted to share a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov that is on the Torah portion. If you have to go, I will not be offended. But I did want to share with you, and I keep meaning to do this every week, but then our time is taken up. So I'll just say, for those who do have to go, I'll just say to you that for next time, we're going to read chapter 5 and chapter 7. They're both relatively brief. And I know that you all are not sure that we can hit more than one chapter at a time, but these I will do it. Okay, chapter 5 and 7. They're relatively brief. What I want to just share with you, let me just get there, if you can hang around for a minute, just to go in a different direction and remind you that the Baal Shem Tov did not only write about prayer, but he also wrote about other things. And reminder that the Amud HaTefillah, the book that we're reading, actually takes place in the context of his exposition of Parshat Noach. Where did it go? I know it's here because I just put it there. Okay, there we go. And again, if you got a split, I won't be offended, but if you got a few minutes, I'll give you this bonus. Okay, so what he's doing here is he's looking at this week's Torah portion, which is Vayeshev, and whoops, where'd it go? And Vayeshev starts in this way. Hold on, let's get there. So frustrating when that happens. Okay. All righty. Why does that happen? Does it start at 37:1? I think so. Okay. Yes. So Jacob settled in the land where his father had sojourned, the Eretz Canaan, in the land of Canaan. Okay. Ele toldot Yaakov Yosef ben Sheva Esra Shana Haya Ro'e et Echav. So this then is the line of Jacob. At 17 years of age, and here's the phrase he's going to focus on, Haya Ro'e et Echav Batson. He tended the flocks with his brothers. Literally, he was a shepherd, a Ro'e. He was a shepherd with his of his brothers, with his brothers of the flock. Vahu na'aret b'nei Bilha, etc. So he was the child of Bilha. Okay, or he was the helper of Bilha. Okay, so the key phrase is here. He was the ro'eh et echav batson. He was the shepherd with his brothers of the flocks. Okay, that's what the pshat of the verse is. Now, what the Baal Shem Tov picks up on is he united and brought together and connected. Okay, now just bear with me. As in the phrase achava v'reut. So in the Sheva Brachot, if you've ever been to a wedding, the 7 benedictions, in the 6th blessing of the 7 benedictions at a wedding, there's all this prayers for all of these good things, and among them are achava and reut. And the word reut means companionship or friendship. And the root of reut at least appears to be the same as ro'eh, which is shepherd. Okay? So that's one thing he's going to pick up on here. So he says, he united and brought together and connected, as in the phrase achava v'reut, because he was like it's turning the word friendship into a verb. Okay. Now he is called a shepherd of the flock, right? Ro'eh et hatson. Ro'eh is shepherd, and also this weird word meaning like friendship. Because he would unify and bring together the flock to a single place. So he's saying it both in the case of Joseph, but also he's just saying that's a shepherd. According to him, a shepherd is called a shepherd, and the word shepherd has this valence of like bringing together and companionship, because you're taking like the sheep that are scattered everywhere and you're bringing them together. Okay, so that's why the word shepherd means that, which maybe it does. I don't know. So they would not scatter here and there. And this is what the Torah is saying here, that he would unite his brothers. Now here, look what he's doing here. So the word et here, I don't want to get too far into the grammar, but the word et very often is just it's this Hebrew, it doesn't have any English equivalent. It has this Hebrew meaning of that's used when a verb is acting on an object. It sometimes the word requires it, but et can also mean with. So in this translation, they read it as with. He tended with his brothers to the flock. Right? They're reading this word et as with, but the Baal Shem Tov is reading it in the other sense. He was a shepherd of his brothers. Okay, that's how he's reading it. Now, why does that matter? That is what the Torah is saying here, that he would unite his brothers. Now, this is when you read it against the pshat of the first half of the Torah, or the first several Torah portions of Joseph's life, that's a little hard to see how that's so. But if you think about through the end, it actually is exactly what happens. He actually does bring his entire family together, right? If you think of the Joseph story, eventually Joseph manages to unite the whole family. So he would unite his brothers. I think that is probably supposed to say that is all Israel, and the sparks of the Shekhinah, right? He would bring them together in holiness and help them connect to the divine. It was all in order to elevate and to rectify them, that is the Israelites, through the holy unifications that he did with the flock. And then he has this strange take on the word flock, which we don't have time for. But what I want to point out, the reason that I wanted to spend time on this, first, let me just briefly summarize and then explain why I think that this is teaching is important. So he takes the word ro'eh, which is shepherd, and he understands it to be connected to this word for like connecting people through friendship. And he says that that's essentially what Joseph was. He was a person who created unity among scattered parts, not only among his brothers, but ultimately he showed all of Israel, this is how you do this. And not only that, he also implies, although there's no, you can't point to Torah verses for it, that he then also helped them create connection with the Shekhinah, with God, okay, by teaching them, who knows, spirituality and prayer, and help them understand their true source. And in fact, now that I think of it, he does do that, because he says to his brothers, don't have any guilt about what happened to me. God did all of this. Remember that moment? He actually does let them know that God has been operating in their life. So the Baal Shem Tov says he is a person who created connection between people and between the people and God. Now, the reason that I wanted to share this teaching is because in this book that we're looking at, Amud HaTefillah, the emphasis is so much on the individual experience of the prayer, that is of you and me, and giving us tips for how you can cleave to God through prayer, and how I can cleave to God through prayer, that we can forget that actually was not the primary emphasis of the Baal Shem Tov. And I want us just to kind of file this away as we read through this magnificent book about prayer. Ultimately, the Baal Shem Tov was deeply concerned with how people related to one another, and how one Jew related to another Jew, how human beings relate to each other and create unity in the ethical realm, in the human realm, and kindness and decency, and bringing people together and seeing their commonality, and then elevating that to the divine realm. And I don't want us to lose sight of the social dimension, if you will, of Chassidut, which is easy to lose sight of when you're focusing on this book for several weeks. So I wanted to share this teaching, both to give you a sense of his genius in Torah interpretation, but also to remind you that ultimately that's really where we, as we will eventually see, where a lot of the focus of Chassidut is how we relate to other human beings and see in them a picture of the divine, and how we see ourselves in them. That's all I got. So for next time, we'll read 5 and 7. Alice Gansfield, wonderful to have you here. Wonderful to see you. And give my love to the good folks back in Boulder, especially Holly and Rabbi Bronstein.
Will do.
Rabbi?
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
The Tetragrammaton that we usually recognize as Yud-Hey Vav-Hey.
Yeah.
Why in so many places in this chapter is it Yud-Kaf, Vav-Kaf?
Oh, because they don't want. So when a publisher prints the book, they don't want to print God's name.
So you don't throw it out.
Yeah, because you don't want to misuse it, and if the book gets dropped, or if the book gets something poured on it, or thrown away, or recycled, you were prohibited from demeaning the divine name. And so they put that in as a substitute, so you know what they mean, but they haven't actually printed God's name.
Yeah, but they're following it with your God.
Because in English, it's not really. We're not prohibited from. There's no mitzvah. There's no halachic prohibition against erasing the word God with English letters, but we can't erase or abuse it when it's written in Hebrew letters.
Okay.
So it's a little publisher's trick. There are other ways of doing it. Sometimes they'll do Yud, Hey, Vav, and then a hyphen, and then a Hey, or they'll just say Hashem. That's why what Hashem is a stand-in for that. Or just the letter Hey with a little apostrophe. Sometimes they'll do that instead. So then you don't have to worry about it. Okay. Thanks all. That was great. Thank you for the conversation. Take care.
Thank you, Rabbi. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye.